Hi guys, let's talk about our practice landscape painting. So our objectives are practice using value and contrast to create a monochromatic landscape in tempera paints. Remember, mono means one, so we're going to be using one color. We're going to use atmospheric perspective, relative size, and overlap to create believable space. And then finally, we're going to use one color of your choice and follow the steps to create your practice painting. So let's get going. So step 1. You're going to lightly trace the landforms of your landscape. So I would recommend if you're going to do a desert, look up some desert landscapes, mountains, beach, whatever you want to do. And just get like the general kind of feel of what those types of shapes, what type of plants are in there, what type of shapes of the trees. You're not copying anything exactly. You're just kind of getting ideas so it'll look right when you start doing it. You could also do a cityscape if you want. City might be a little bit more challenging because you're going to have more edges, but it's up to you. So as you're drawing this out, you want at least 5 layers. So you should have a really definite foreground, middle ground, background. So you're going to choose a hue or color that you're going to paint this in. I would say the easiest colors to pick are like a red, a green, an orange, something in the middle, because that will be easier to pull a range of value. I chose violet, and that was a little bit more challenging. Even a yellow might be a little bit more challenging because it's on the other end. It's a pretty light value. But you can choose whatever you'd like. So before you get started, I highly recommend you create that value scale of 5 different values of your hue, just so you get the feel of mixing those values and you have an exemplar. I didn't do that, and I wish I would have. And remember, we're using our tints, our tones, and our shades. We're not necessarily using a lot of tones here. Remember, tones adding a gray to your color. But you can do that if you'd like and play around with it. So our step 2 is to start painting. So I'm starting with my background, my part that's the furthest in the back. When I start painting these, I like to do back to front. And then you're going to paint that the lightest value. Like I said, I wish I would have painted that a little bit lighter. So that's why it's really helpful to make a value scale first, just to make sure you're going to have that range. So as that's drying, you're going to mix your next value and you're going to paint the next closest part of the landscape. So I'm still kind of in the background area of my painting. And then with tempera paint, you can kind of do wet next to wet and it won't mix. It's not like watercolor where it will react. But let it dry a little bit before you do the next layer. Alright, so I'm just moving along. So now I'm on the next part. So as that section dries, I'm painting that section. And you'll notice I haven't done any kind of trees or anything yet. That's on purpose. So also, as you're moving along, so now I'm on my 3rd section, make sure your values have contrast. They look different. They look light, a little bit darker, but not too much that once you get to the end, all of a sudden it's going to be really hard to make a distinction between your last 2 values. That's where I kind of messed up on this. So I went a little bit too dark too fast, and I wish I would have went a little bit lighter at the top. So that's why you should make a value scale first. And now I'm kind of in the middle ground of my painting. So step 5, same thing, wash, rinse, repeat. So as that one's drying, I started making the next section. But you will notice I started adding some trees and some foliage in there. Now what I did though is I waited for that section to dry. And then I reactivated on my palette that paint, and I just started, I just like poke in there with the brush. This is abstract. I'm not trying to do anything in particular, but like I kind of poked in on the edge with that value. If I would have done this while those 2 sides, that lighter hue was wet, what would have happened is it would have mixed. So I needed to let that dry before I did that on top. And then same with the second section. So I had to let that dry before I started painting the trees on top, and I used kind of a dry brush. I don't want to use a lot of water with this because what's going to happen, tempera is not like acrylic where it's stuck. It will reactivate that paint and I'll start mixing my hues together or my values, and I don't want to do that. So make sure if you're going to do this, it's kind of dry brush on top. And then just if you want to push this a little bit further, you want it to look more realistic, you can add little details and things in there. So like on this section right here, you want to make that like a slightly darker value in there for it to look right. But play around with this. I'm going to have you make a couple of these, so that's just an option if you want to try to make it a little more realistic. All right, we're going to keep moving along. Wash, rinse, repeat. So as this dries, I'm going to do the next section. So you can see I'm getting a lot darker, and you can also see how the value kind of changes as it dries. So I'm getting to the foreground now. This is the part of the landscape that is closest to me. All right, I'm just about done. And then the same thing with those little things I added. I waited till those other sections I'm painting on top of were dry before I did that over the top. All right, so as I'm getting this last section right here, this should be the most intense, darkest, saturated part, because this is the absolute foreground. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sections on mine. You might have stopped at 5. But just so you know, that front one should be the darkest, most saturated value. And then step 9, I added a framing element in mine. A framing element is something that comes off the side that acts as a frame. You don't have to do that, but I just wanted to add a little extra. So I added a tree there. And then to make the tree, I can show you in class. I'm just kind of like stamping my brush like Bob Ross style. I'm not doing anything fancy. And then again, this should be the most saturated, darkest value. So if you're looking at my painting, and it is wet, so it looks a little weird, the front 2 foreground pieces are a little bit too close. So that's why I'm going to have you practice this a few times so you can kind of get the hang of it. And then last, allow your painting to dry fully. Mix matching values to add any other elements as desired. So maybe you want to go back into the lightest section and add something. So mix your paint, try to match it as well as you can. You can paint in there, but remember, don't use a lot of water if you're going to paint on top, or it will reactivate the tempera. And then check off with me when you're done. I hope you have fun with this. Good job.